Sometimes rulers like Alauddin Khalji and Muhammad Tughlaq could force their control in these areas, but only for a short duration. The Mongols under Genghis Khan invaded Transoxiana in northeast Iran in 1219. And the Delhi Sultanate faced their onslaught soon after. Mongol attacks on the Delhi Sultanate increased during the reign of Alauddin Khalji and in the early years of Muhammad Tughlaq's rule. This forced the two rulers to mobilize a large standing army in Delhi, which posed a huge administrative challenge. Let us see how the two sultans dealt with this. In this list of Muhammad Tughlaq's failures, we sometimes forget that for the first time in the history of the Sultanate, a Delhi Sultan planned a campaign to capture Mongol territory. Unlike Alauddin's defensive measures, Muhammad Tughlaq's measures were conceived as a part of a military offensive against the Mongols. The Sultanate in the 15th and 16th centuries. Take a look at Table 1 again. You will notice that after the Tughlaqs, the Sayyid and Lodi dynasties ruled from Delhi and Agra until 1526. By then, Jaunpur, Bengal, Malwa, Gujarat, Rajasthan and the entire South India had independent rulers who established flourishing states and prosperous capitals. This was also the period which saw the emergence of new ruling groups like the Afghans and the Rajputs. Some of the states established in this period were small but powerful and extremely well administered. Sher Shah Sur, 1540 to 1545, started his career as the manager of a small territory for his uncle in Bihar and eventually challenged and defeated the Mughal Emperor Humayun, 1530 to 1540, 1555 to 1556. Sher Shah captured Delhi and established his own dynasty. Although the Suri dynasty ruled for only 15 years, 1540 to 1555, it introduced an administration that borrowed elements from Alauddin Khalji and made them more efficient. Sher Shah's administration became the model followed by the great Emperor Akbar, 1556 to 1605, when he consolidated the Mughal Empire. The Three Orders, the Peace of God, Knights and the Crusades. The idea of the Three Orders was first formulated in France in the early 11th century. It divided society into three classes: those who prayed, those who fought, and those who tilled the land. This division of society into three orders was supported by the Church to consolidate its dominant role in society. This helped the emergence of a new warrior group called Knights. The Church patronized this group and used them to propagate their idea of peace of God. The attempt was to direct warriors away from conflict amongst themselves and send them instead on a campaign against the Muslims who had captured the city of Jerusalem. This led to a series of campaigns called the Crusades. These campaigns in the service of God and the Church completely altered the status of knights. Originally, these knights did not belong to the class of nobles. But by the end of the 11th century in France, and a century later in Germany, the humble origins of these warriors were forgotten. By the 12th century, nobles also wanted to be known as knights. Imagine. You are a peasant in Alauddin Khalji's or Muhammad Tughlaq's reign and you cannot pay the taxes demanded by the Sultan. What will you do? The Circle of Justice. Fakhri Mudabbir wrote in the 13th century. A king cannot survive without soldiers. And soldiers cannot live without salaries. Salaries come from the revenue collected from peasants. But peasants can pay revenue only when they are prosperous and happy. This happens when the king promotes justice and honest governance. Kuwait al-Islam Mosque. Kuwait al-Islam Mosque and minaret built during the last decade of the 12th century. This was the congregational mosque of the first city built by the Delhi Sultans, described in the chronicles as Delhi-Kuna, the Old City. The mosque was enlarged by Iltutmish and Alauddin Khalji. The minar was built by three sultans: Qutbuddin Aibak, Iltutmish, and Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Begumpuri Mosque. Begumpuri Mosque, built in the reign of Muhammad Tughlaq, was the main mosque of Jahanpana, the sanctuary of the world, his new capital in Delhi. Slaves rather than sons. The sultans were advised, a slave, whom one has brought up and promoted, must be looked after, for it needs a whole lifetime and good luck to find a worthy and experienced slave. Wise men have said that a worthy and experienced slave is better than a son. Officials of Sultan Muhammad Tughlaq. Sultan Muhammad Tughlaq appointed Aziz Qamar, a wine distiller, Firaz Hajam, a barber, Mankatabak, a cook, and 2 gardeners, Ladha and Pira, to high administrative posts. Ziauddin Barani, a mid-14th century chronicler, reported their appointments as a sign of the Sultan's loss of political judgment and his incapacity to rule. Chieftains and their fortifications. Ibn Battuta, a 14th century traveler from Morocco, Africa, explained that chieftains sometimes fortified themselves in mountains, in rocky, uneven and rugged places, as well as in bamboo groves. In India the bamboo is not hollow, it is big. Its several parts are so intertwined that even fire cannot affect them, and they are on the whole very strong. The chieftains live in these forests, which serve them as ramparts, inside which are their cattle and their crops. There is also water for them within, that is, rain water which collects there. Hence they cannot be subdued except by powerful armies, who, entering these forests, cut down the bamboos with specially prepared instruments. Alauddin Khalji. Delhi was attacked twice, in 1299/1300 and 1300 and 203. As a defensive measure, Alauddin Khalji raised a large standing army. Alauddin constructed a new garrison town named Siri for his soldiers. The soldiers had to be fed. This was done through the produce collected as tax from lands between the Ganga and Yamuna. Tax was fixed at 50% of the peasants' yield. The soldiers had to be paid. Alauddin chose to pay his soldiers' salaries in cash rather than iktas. The soldiers would buy their supplies from merchants in Delhi, and it was thus feared that merchants would raise their prices. To stop this, Alauddin controlled the prices of goods in Delhi. Prices were carefully surveyed by officers, and merchants who did not sell at the prescribed rates were punished. Alauddin's administrative measures were quite successful, and chroniclers praised his reign for its cheap prices and efficient supplies of goods in the market. He successfully withstood the threat of Mongol invasions. Muhammad Tughlaq. The Sultanate was attacked in the early years of Muhammad Tughlaq's reign. The Mongol army was defeated. Muhammad Tughlaq was confident about the strength of his army and his resources to plan an attack on Transoxiana. He therefore raised a large standing army. Rather than constructing a new garrison town, the oldest of the 4 cities of Delhi, Dilai Khana, was emptied of its residents and the soldiers garrisoned there. The residents of the old city were sent to the new capital of Daulatabad in the south. Produce from the same area was collected as tax to feed the army. But to meet the need of the large number of soldiers, the Sultan levied additional taxes. This coincided with famine in the area. Muhammad Tughlaq also paid his soldiers cash salaries. But instead of controlling prices, he used a token currency, somewhat like present-day paper currency, but made out of cheap metals, not gold and silver. People in the 14th century did not trust these coins. They were very smart. They saved their gold and silver coins and paid all their taxes to the state with this token currency. This cheap currency could also be counterfeited easily. Muhammad Tughlaq's administrative measures were a failure. His campaign into Kashmir was a disaster. He then gave up his plans to invade Transoxiana and disbanded his large army. Meanwhile, his administrative measures created complications. The shifting of people to Daulatabad was resented. The raising of taxes and famine in the Ganga-Yamuna belt led to widespread rebellion. And finally, the token currency had to be recalled. 4. The creation of an empire. The Mughal dynasty. Ruling as large a territory as the Indian subcontinent with such a diversity of people and cultures was an extremely difficult task for any ruler to accomplish in the Middle Ages. Quite in contrast to their predecessors, the Mughals created an empire and accomplished what had hitherto seemed possible for only short periods of time. From the latter half of the 16th century they expanded their kingdom from Agra and Delhi until in the 17th century they controlled nearly all of the subcontinent. They imposed structures of administration and ideas of governance that outlasted their rule, leaving a political legacy that succeeding rulers of the subcontinent could not ignore. Today the Prime Minister of India addresses the nation from the ramparts of the Red Fort in Delhi, the residence of the Mughal emperors, on Independence Day. Who were the Mughals? The Mughals were descendants of two great lineages of rulers. From their mother's side they were descendants of Genghis Khan, died 1227, ruler of the Mongol tribes, China and Central Asia. From their father's side they were the successors of Timur, died 1404, the ruler of Iran, Iraq and modern-day Turkey. However, the Mughals did not like to be called Mughal or Mongol. This was because Genghis Khan's memory was associated with the massacre of innumerable people. It was also linked with the Uzbeks, their Mongol competitors. On the other hand, the Mughals were proud of their Timurid ancestry, not least of all because their great ancestor had captured Delhi in 1398. They celebrated their genealogy pictorially, each ruler getting a picture made of Timur and himself. Take a look at Figure 1, which is somewhat like a group photograph. Mughal military campaigns. Babur, the first Mughal emperor, 1526 to 1530, succeeded to the throne of Fergana in 1494 when he was only 12 years old. He was forced to leave his ancestral throne due to the invasion of another Mongol group, the Uzbeks. After years of wandering he seized Kabul in 1504. In 1526 he defeated the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, at Panipat and captured Delhi and Agra. Table 1 charts some of the major campaigns of the Mughals. Study it carefully and see if you can notice any long-term patterns. You will notice, for example, that the Afghans were an immediate threat to Mughal authority. Note the relationship between the Mughals and the Ahams, the Sikhs, and Mewar and Marwar. How was Humayun's relationship with Safavid Iran different from Akbar's? Did the annexation of Golconda and Bijapur in Aurangzeb's reign end hostilities in the Deccan? Table 1. Mughal emperors. Major campaigns and events. Babur 1526 to 1530. 1526 defeated Ibrahim Lodi and his Afghan supporters at Panipat. 1527 defeated Rana Sanga, Rajput rulers and allies at Kanua. 1528 defeated the Rajputs at Chanderi. Established control over Agra and Delhi before his death. Humayun 1530 to 1540 and 1555 to 1556. 2. Humayun divided his inheritance according to the will of his father. His brothers were each given a province. The ambitions of his brother Mirza Kamran weakened Humayun's cause against Afghan competitors. Sher Khan defeated Humayun at Shoza, 1539, and Kanoi, 1540, forcing him to flee to Iran. 3. In Iran Humayun received help from the Safavid Shah. He recaptured Delhi in 1555 but died in an accident the following year. Akbar 1556 to 1605. Akbar was 13 years old when he became emperor. His reign can be divided into 3 periods. 1. 1556 to 1570 Akbar became independent of the regent Bairam Khan and other members of his domestic staff. Military campaigns were launched against the Suris and other Afghans, against the neighbouring kingdoms of Malwa and Gondwana, and to suppress the revolt of his half-brother Mirza Hakim and the Uzbeks. In 1568 the Sisodia capital of Chittor was seized and in 1569 Ranthambore. 2. 1570 to 1585 military campaigns in Gujarat were followed by campaigns in the east in Bihar, Bengal, and Orissa. These campaigns were complicated by the 1579-1580 revolt in support of Mirza Hakim. 3. 1585 to 1605 Expansion of Akbar's empire. Campaigns in the northwest. Kandahar was seized from the Safavids, Kashmir was annexed, as also Kabul, after the death of Mirza Hakim. Campaigns in the Deccan started and Berar, Khandish, and parts of Ahmednagar were annexed. In the last years of his reign Akbar was distracted by the rebellion of Prince Salim, the future Emperor Jahangir. Jahangir 1605 to 1627. Military campaigns started by Akbar continued. The Sisodia ruler of Mewar, Amar Singh, accepted Mughal service. Less successful campaigns against the Sikhs, the Ahams, and Ahmednagar followed. Prince Khurram, the future Emperor Shah Jahan, rebelled in the last years of his reign. The efforts of Nur Jahan, Jahangir's wife, to marginalize him were unsuccessful. Shah Jahan 1627 to 1658. Mughal campaigns continued in the Deccan under Shah Jahan. The Afghan noble Khan Jahan Lodi rebelled and was defeated. Campaigns were launched against Ahmednagar, the Bundelis were defeated and Orchha seized. In the northwest, the campaign to seize Balkh from the Uzbegs was unsuccessful and Kandahar was lost to the Safavids. In 1632 Ahmednagar was finally annexed and the Bijapur forces sued for peace. In 1657 to 1658, there was conflict over succession amongst Shah Jahan's sons. Aurangzeb was victorious and his three brothers, including Dara Shikoh, were killed. Shah Jahan was imprisoned for the rest of his life in Agra. Aurangzeb 1658 to 1707. 1. In the northeast, the Ahams were defeated in 1663, but rebelled again in the 1680s. Campaigns in the northwest against the Yusufzai and the Sikhs were temporarily successful. Mughal intervention in the succession and internal politics of the Rajputs of Marwar led to their rebellion. Campaigns against the Maratha chieftain Shivaji were initially successful. But Aurangzeb insulted Shivaji, who escaped from Agra, declared himself an independent king and resumed his campaigns against the Mughals. Prince Akbar rebelled against Aurangzeb and received support from the Marathas and Deccan Sultanate. He finally fled to Safavid Iran. 2. After Akbar's rebellion Aurangzeb sent armies against the Deccan Sultanates. Bijapur was annexed in 1685 and Golconda in 1687. From 1698 Aurangzeb personally managed campaigns in the Deccan against the Marathas who started guerrilla warfare. Aurangzeb also had to face the rebellion in North India of the Sikhs, Jats, and Satnamis, in the northeast of the Ahams and in the Deccan of the Marathas. His death was followed by a succession conflict amongst his sons. Mughal traditions of succession. The Mughals did not believe in the rule of primogeniture, where the eldest son inherited his father's estate. Instead they followed the Mughal and Timurid custom of co-parcenary inheritance, or a division of the inheritance amongst all the sons. Follow the highlighted passages in Table 1, and note the evidence for rebellions by Mughal princes. Which do you think is a fairer division of inheritance, primogeniture or co-parcenary? Mughal relations with other rulers. Take a look at Table 1 once again. You will notice that the Mughal rulers campaigned constantly against rulers who refused to accept their authority. But as the Mughals became powerful, many other rulers also joined them voluntarily. The Rajputs are a good example of this. Many of them married their daughters into Mughal families and received high positions. But many resisted as well. The Sisodia Rajputs refused to accept Mughal authority for a long time. Once defeated, however, they were honorably treated by the Mughals, given their lands, Watan, back as assignments, Watan Jagir. The careful balance between defeating but not humiliating their opponents enabled the Mughals to extend their influence over many kings and chieftains. But it was difficult to keep this balance all the time. Look at Table 1 again. Note that Aurangzeb insulted Shivaji when he came to accept Mughal authority. What was the consequence of this insult? Mansabdars and Jagirdars. As the empire expanded to encompass different regions, the Mughals recruited diverse bodies of people. From a small nucleus of Turkish nobles, Turanis, they expanded to include Iranians, Indian Muslims, Afghans, Rajputs, Marathas, and other groups. Those who joined Mughal service were enrolled as Mansabdars. The term Mansabdar refers to an individual who holds a mansab, meaning a position or rank. It was a grading system used by the Mughals to fix 1. Rank, 2. Salary, and 3. Military responsibilities. Rank and salary were determined by a numerical value called zat. The higher the zat, the more prestigious was the noble's position in court and the larger his salary. The Mansabdar's military responsibilities required him to maintain a specified number of sawar or cavalrymen. The Mansabdar brought his cavalrymen for review, got them registered, their horses branded, and then received money to pay them as salary. Mansabdars received their salaries as revenue assignments called jagirs, which were somewhat like iktas. But unlike muktis, most Mansabdars did not actually reside in or administer their jagirs. They only had rights to the revenue of their assignments, which was collected for them by their servants, while the Mansabdars themselves served in some other part of the country. In Akbar's reign, these jagirs were carefully assessed so that their revenues were roughly equal to the salary of the Mansadar. By Aurangzeb's reign this was no longer the case, and the actual revenue collected was often less than the granted sum. There was also a huge increase in the number of Mansabdars, which meant a long wait before they received a jagir. These and other factors created a shortage in the number of jagirs. As a result, many jagirdars tried to extract as much revenue as possible while they had a jagir. Aurangzeb was unable to control these developments in the last years of his reign, and the peasantry therefore suffered tremendously. Zabt and zamindars. The main source of income available to Mughal rulers was tax on the produce of the peasantry. In most places, peasants paid taxes through the rural elites, that is, the headman or the local chieftain. The Mughals used one term zamindars to describe all intermediaries, whether they were local headmen of villages or powerful chieftains. Akbar's revenue minister, Todar Mal, carried out a careful survey of crop yields, prices and areas cultivated for a 10-year period, 1570 to 1580. On the basis of this data, tax was fixed on each crop in cash. Each province was divided into revenue circles with its own schedule of revenue rates for individual crops. This revenue system was known as zabt. It was prevalent in those areas where Mughal administrators could survey the land and keep very careful accounts. This was not possible in provinces such as Gujarat and Bengal. In some areas the zamindars exercised a great deal of power. The exploitation by Mughal administrators could drive them to rebellion. Sometimes zamindars and peasants of the same caste allied in rebelling against Mughal authority. These peasant revolts challenged the stability of the Mughal Empire from the end of the 17th century. A closer look at Akbar's policies. The broad features of administration were laid down by Akbar and were elaborately discussed by Abul Fazl in his book the Akbarnama, in particular in its last volume, the Aini Akbari. Abul Fazl explained that the empire was divided into provinces called subas, governed by a subadar who carried out both political and military functions. Each province also had a financial officer or diwan. For the maintenance of peace and order in his province, the subadar was supported by other officers such as the military paymaster, Bakshi, the minister in charge of religious and charitable patronage, Sadr, military commanders, Faujadars, and the town police commander. Kotwal. Akbar's nobles commanded large armies and had access to large amounts of revenue. While they were loyal, the empire functioned efficiently, but by the end of the 17th century many nobles had built independent networks of their own. Their loyalties to the empire were weakened by their own self-interest. While Akbar was at Fatehpur Sikri during the 1570s, he started discussions on religion with the ulama, Brahmanas, Jesuit priests who were Roman Catholics, and Zoroastrians. These discussions took place in the Ibadat Khana. He was interested in the religion and social customs of different people. It made him realize that religious scholars who emphasized ritual and dogma were often bigots. Their teachings created divisions and disharmony amongst his subjects. This eventually led Akbar to the idea of Sulh-i Kul or universal peace. This idea of tolerance did not discriminate between people of different religions in his realm. Instead, it focused on a system of ethics, honesty, justice, peace that was universally applicable. Abul Fazl helped Akbar in framing a vision of governance around this idea of Sulh-i Kul. This principle of governance was followed by Jahangir and Shah Jahan as well. The Mughal Empire in the 17th century and after. The administrative and military efficiency of the Mughal Empire led to great economic and commercial prosperity. International travelers described it as the fabled land of wealth. But these same visitors were also appalled at the state of poverty that existed side by side with the greatest opulence. The inequalities were glaring. Documents from the 20th year of Shah Jahan's reign inform us that the highest-ranking Mansabdars were only 445 in number out of a total of 8,000. This small number, a mere 5.6% of the total number of Mansabdars, received 61.5% of the total estimated revenue of the empire as salaries for themselves and their troopers. The Mughal emperors and their Mansabdars spent a great deal of their income on salaries and goods. This expenditure benefited the artisans and peasantry who supplied them with goods and produce. But the scale of revenue collection left very little for investment in the hands of the primary producers, the peasant and the artisan. The poorest amongst them lived from hand to mouth, and they could hardly consider investing in additional resources, tools and supplies to increase productivity. The wealthier peasantry and artisanal groups, the merchants and bankers, profited in this economic world. The enormous wealth and resources commanded by the Mughal elite made them an extremely powerful group of people in the late 17th century. As the authority of the Mughal emperor slowly declined, his servants emerged as powerful centers of power in the regions. They constituted new dynasties and held command of provinces like Hyderabad and Awadh. Although they continued to recognize the Mughal emperor in Delhi as their master, by the 18th century the provinces of the empire had consolidated their independent political identities. We will read more about them in Chapter 10. Queens and Kings. There were several great monarchs, all near contemporaries in different parts of the world in the 16th century. These included Queen Elizabeth I, 1558 to 1603, of England. Elizabeth was the last ruler of a dynasty known as the Tudors. Elizabeth's rule was marked by several conflicts. Foremost amongst these were conflicts between the Roman Catholic Church and the Protestants, who were attempting to reform the Church. Elizabeth sided with the latter, and tried to establish the independence of the Church of England from Roman control, even as she adopted several practices of the Roman Church. She came into conflict with Philip II, the powerful ruler of Spain, and defeated a Spanish effort to attack England. Under her patronage, English sailors harassed the Spanish fleet and made it difficult for them to control the wealth of the Americas. She was a great patron of the arts and supported the famous English playwright William Shakespeare. A poet named Edmund Spenser wrote a long epic poem called The Faerie Queen in her praise. Find out more about Akbar's other contemporaries. The ruler of Ottoman Turkey, Sultan Suleiman, also known as Al-Kanuni or the Lawgiver, 1520 to 1566, the Safavid ruler of Iran, Shah Abbas, 1588 to 1629, and the more controversial Russian ruler, Tsar Ivan IV Vasilyevich, also called Ivan the Terrible, 1530 to 1584. Imagine. Babur and Akbar were about your age when they became rulers. Imagine you have inherited a kingdom. How would you make your kingdom stable and prosperous? Mughal marriages with the Rajputs. The mother of Jahangir was a Kushwaha princess, daughter of the Rajput ruler of Amber, modern-day Jaipur. The mother of Shah Jahan was a Raithar princess, daughter of the Rajput ruler of Marwar, Jodhpur. Zat ranking. Nobles with a Zat of 5,000 were ranked higher than those of 1,000. In Akbar's reign there were 29 Mansabdars with a rank of 5,000 Zat, by Aurangzeb's reign the number of mansabdars had increased to 79. Would this have meant more expenditure for the state? Akbar Ama and Aini Akbari. Akbar ordered one of his close friends and courtiers, Abul Fazl, to write a history of his reign. Abul Fazl wrote a 3-volume history of Akbar's reign titled, Akbarnama. The first volume dealt with Akbar's ancestors and the second volume recorded the events of Akbar's reign. The third volume is the Aini Akbari. It deals with Akbar's administration, household, army, the revenues, and geography of his empire. It also provides rich details about the traditions and culture of the people living in India. The most interesting aspect about the Aini Akbari is its rich statistical details about things as diverse as crops, yields, prices, wages and revenues. Nur Jahan's influence in Jahangir's court. Muranisa married the Emperor Jahangir in 1611 and received the title Nur Jahan. She remained extremely loyal and supportive to the monarch. As a mark of honor, Jahangir struck silver coins bearing his own titles on one side and on the other the inscription struck in the name of the Queen Begum, Nur Jahan. The adjoining document is an order, Farman, of Nur Jahan. The square seal states, Command of Her Most Sublime and Elevated Majesty Nur Jahan Pad Shah Begum. The round seal states, by the son of Shah Jahangir she became as brilliant as the moon, may Nur Jahan Pad Shah be the lady of the age. Dogma. A statement or an interpretation declared as authoritative with the expectation that it would be followed without question. Bigot. An individual who is intolerant of another person's religious beliefs or culture. Sulhai Kul. Jahangir, Akbar's son, described his father's policy of Sulhai Kul in the following words. As in the wide expanse of the divine compassion there is room for all classes and the followers of all creeds, so, in his imperial dominions, which on all sides were limited only the sea, there was room for the professors of opposite religions, and for beliefs, good and bad, and the road to intolerance was closed. Sunnis and Shias met in one mosque and Christians and Jews in one church to pray. He consistently followed the principle of universal peace, Sulhai Kul. 5 Rulers and buildings. Figure 1 shows the first balcony of the Qutb Minar. Qutbuddin Aibak had this constructed around 1199. Notice the pattern created under the balcony by the small arches and geometrical designs. Can you find 2 bands of inscriptions under the balcony? These are in Arabic. Notice that the surface of the minar is curved and angular. Placing an inscription on such a surface required great precision. Only the most skilled craftsperson could perform this task. Remember that very few buildings were made of stone or brick 800 years ago. What would have been the impact of a building like the Qutb Minar on observers in the 13th century? Between the 8th and the 18th centuries kings and their officers built 2 kinds of structures. The first were forts, palaces, and tombs safe, protected and grandiose places of rest in this world and the next. The second were structures meant for public activity including temples, mosques, tanks, wells, caravanserais, and bazaars. Kings were expected to care for their subjects, and by making structures for their use and comfort, rulers hoped to win their praise. Construction activity was also carried out by others, including merchants. They built temples, mosques, and wells. However, domestic architecture, large mansions, havelis, of merchants has survived only from the 18th century. Engineering skills in construction. Monuments provide an insight into the technologies used for construction. Take something like a roof for example. We can make this by placing wooden beams or a slab of stone across 4 walls. But the task becomes difficult if we want to make a large room with an elaborate superstructure. This requires more sophisticated skills. Between the 7th and 10th centuries architects started adding more rooms, doors, and windows to buildings. Roofs, doors and windows were still made by placing a horizontal beam across 2 vertical columns, a style of architecture called trabeate or corbelled. Between the 8th and 13th centuries the trabeate style was used in the construction of temples, mosques, tombs attached to large step-ped wells, baileys. Building temples, mosques, and tanks. Temples and mosques were beautifully constructed because they, and in buildings, were places of worship. They were also meant to demonstrate the power, wealth, and devotion of the patron. Take the example of the Rajarajeswara temple. An inscription mentions that it was built by King Rajarajadeva for the worship of his god, Rajarajeshwaram. Notice how the name of the ruler and the god are very similar. The king took the god's name because it was auspicious and he wanted to appear like a god. Through the rituals of worship in the temple, one god, Rajarajadeva, honored another, Rajarajeshwaram. The largest temples were all constructed by kings. The other, lesser deities in the temple were gods and goddesses of the allies and subordinates of the ruler. The temple was a miniature model of the world ruled by the king and his allies. As they worshipped their deities together in the royal temples, it seemed as if they brought the just rule of the gods on earth. Muslim sultans and padshahs did not claim to be incarnations of God, but Persian court chronicles described the sultan as the shadow of God. An inscription in the Delhi Mosque explained that God chose Alauddin as a king because he had the qualities of Moses and Solomon, the great lawgivers of the past. The greatest lawgiver and architect was God himself. He created the world out of chaos and introduced order and symmetry. As each new dynasty came to power, kings wanted to emphasize their moral right to be rulers. Constructing places of worship provided rulers with the chance to proclaim their close relationship with God, especially important in an age of rapid political change. Rulers also offered patronage to the learned and pious, and tried to transform their capitals and cities into great cultural centers that brought fame to their rule and their realm. It was widely believed that the rule of a just king would be an age of plenty when the heavens would not withhold rain. At the same time, making precious water available by constructing tanks and reservoirs was highly praised. Sultan Iltutmish won universal respect for constructing a large reservoir just outside Delhi Kuna. It was called the Hausa Sultani or the King's Reservoir. Can you find it on Map 1 in Chapter 3? Rulers often constructed tanks and reservoirs big and small for use by ordinary people. Sometimes these tanks and reservoirs were part of a temple, mosque, or a gurudwara. Why were temples destroyed? Because kings built temples to demonstrate their devotion to God and their power and wealth, it is not surprising that when they attacked one another's kingdoms, they often targeted these buildings. In the early 9th century, when the Pandyan king Sri Marashrivalabha invaded Sri Lanka and defeated the king, Sena I, 831 to 851, the Buddhist monk and chronicler Dhammakati noted, he removed all the valuables. The statue of the Buddha made entirely of gold in the jewel palace. And the golden images in the various monasteries, all these he seized. The blow to the pride of the Sinhalese ruler had to be avenged, and the next Sinhalese ruler, Sena II, ordered his general to invade Madurai, the capital of the Pandyas. The Buddhist chronicler noted that the expedition made a special effort to find and restore the gold statue of the Buddha. Similarly, in the early 11th century, when the Chola king Rajendra first built a Shiva temple in his capital, he filled it with prized statues seized from defeated rulers. An incomplete list included a sun pedestal from the Chalukyas, a Ganesha statue and several statues of Durga, a Nandi statue from the eastern Chalukyas, an image of Bhairava, a form of Shiva, and Bhairavi from the Kalinas of Orissa, and a Kali statue from the Pallas of Bengal. Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni was a contemporary of Rajendra I. During his campaigns in the subcontinent, he also attacked the temples of defeated kings and looted their wealth and idols. Sultan Mahmud was not a very important ruler at that time. But by destroying temples, especially the one at Somnath, he tried to win credit as a great hero of Islam. In the political culture of the Middle Ages, most rulers displayed their political might and military success by attacking and looting the places of worship of defeated rulers. In what ways do you think the policies of Rajendra I and Mahmud of Ghazni were a product of their times? How were the actions of the two rulers different? Gardens, tombs, and forts. Under the Mughals, architecture became more complex. Babur, Humayun, Akbar, Jahangir, and especially Shah Jahan were personally interested in literature, art and architecture. In his autobiography, Babur described his interest in planning and laying out formal gardens, placed within rectangular walled enclosures and divided into 4 quarters by artificial channels. These gardens were called Chahar Bagh, 4 gardens, because of their symmetrical division into quarters. Beginning with Akbar, some of the most beautiful Chahar Baghs were constructed by Jahangir and Shah Jahan in Kashmir, Agra and Delhi. There were several important architectural innovations during Akbar's reign. For inspiration, Akbar's architects turned to the tombs of his Central Asian ancestor, Timur. The central towering dome and the tall gateway, Pishtuk, became important aspects of Mughal architecture, first visible in Humayun's tomb. It was placed in the center of a huge formal Chahar Bagh and built in the tradition known as 8 Paradises or Hasht-Bihishta central hall surrounded by 8 rooms. The building was constructed with red sandstone, edged with white marble. It was during Shah Jahan's reign that the different elements of Mughal architecture were fused together in a grand harmonious synthesis. His reign witnessed a huge amount of construction activity especially in Agra and Delhi. The ceremonial halls of public and private audience, Diwani Khas or Am, were carefully planned. These courts were also described as Chahil Sutun or 40-pillared halls, placed within a large courtyard. Shah Jahan's audience halls were specially constructed to resemble a mosque. The pedestal on which his throne was placed was frequently described as the Qiblat, the direction faced by Muslims at prayer, since everybody faced that direction when court was in session. The idea of the king as a representative of God on earth was suggested by these architectural features. The connection between royal justice and the imperial court was emphasized by Shah Jahan in his newly constructed court in the Red Fort at Delhi. Behind the emperor's throne were a series of pietra dura inlays that depicted the legendary Greek god Orpheus playing the lute. It was believed that Orpheus' music could calm ferocious beasts until they resided together peaceably. The construction of Shah Jahan's audience hall aimed to communicate that the king's justice would treat the high and the low as equals where all could live together in harmony. In the early years of his reign, Shah Jahan's capital was at Agra, a city where the nobility had constructed their homes on the banks of the river Yamuna. These were set in the midst of formal gardens constructed in the Chahar Bagh format. The Chahar Bagh garden also had a variation that historians describe as the riverfront garden. In this the dwelling was not located in the middle of the Chahar Bagh but at its edge, close to the bank of the river. Shah Jahan adapted the riverfront garden in the layout of the Taj Mahal, the grandest architectural accomplishment of his reign. Here the white marble mausoleum was placed on a terrace by the edge of the river and the garden was to its south. Shah Jahan developed this architectural form as a means to control the access that nobles had to the river. In the new city of Shah Jahanabad that he constructed in Delhi, the imperial palace commanded the riverfront. Only specially favored nobles like his eldest son Dara Shikoh were given access to the river. All others had to construct their homes in the city away from the river Yamuna. Region and Empire. As construction activity increased between the 8th and 18th centuries, there was also a considerable sharing of ideas across regions. The traditions of one region were adopted by another. In Vijayanagara, for example, the elephant stables of the rulers were strongly influenced by the style of architecture found in the adjoining sultanates of Bijapur and Golconda. In Vrindavan, near Mathura, temples were constructed in architectural styles that were very similar to the Mughal palaces in Fatehpur Sikri. The creation of large empires that brought different regions under their rule helped in this cross-fertilization of artistic forms and architectural styles. Mughal rulers were particularly skilled in adapting regional architectural styles in the construction of their own buildings. In Bengal, for example, the local rulers had developed a roof that was designed to resemble a thatched hut. The Mughals liked this Bangla dome so much that they used it in their architecture. The impact of other regions was also evident. In Akbar's capital at Fatehpur Sikri, many of the buildings bear the impact of the architectural styles of Gujarat and Malwa. Even though the authority of the Mughal rulers waned in the 18th century, the architectural styles developed under their patronage were constantly used and adapted by other rulers whenever they tried to establish their own kingdoms. Decorated pillars and struts holding the extension of the roof in Jod Bhai Palace in Fatehpur Sikri. These follow architectural traditions of the Gujarat region. Churches that touched the skies. From the 12th century onwards, attempts began in France to build churches that were taller and lighter than earlier buildings. This architectural style, known as Gothic, was distinguished by high-pointed arches, the use of stained glass, often painted with scenes drawn from the Bible, and flying buttresses. Tall spires and bell towers which were visible from a distance were added to the church. One of the best-known examples of this architectural style is the Church of Notre Dame in Paris, which was constructed through several decades in the 12th and 13th centuries. Imagine. You are an artisan standing on a tiny wooden platform held together by bamboo and rope 50 meters above the ground. You have to place an inscription under the first balcony of the Qutb Minar. How would you do this? Temple construction in the early 11th century. The Kandariya Mahadeva temple dedicated to Shiva was constructed in 999 by King Dhanjadeva of the Chandela dynasty. Figure 3b is the plan of the temple. An ornamented gateway led to an entrance, and the main hall, Mahamandapa, where dances were performed. The image of the chief deity was kept in the main shrine, Garbhagriha. This was the place for ritual worship where only the king, his immediate family and priests gathered. The Khajuraho complex contained royal temples where commoners were not allowed entry. The temples were decorated with elaborately carved sculptures. Figure 4. The Rudrakeshvara temple at Tanjavur had the tallest shikhara amongst temples of its time. Constructing it was not easy because there were no cranes in those days and the 90-ton stone for the top of the shikhara was too heavy to lift manually. So the architects built an inclined path to the top of the temple, placed the boulder on rollers and rolled it all the way to the top. The path started more than 4 kilometers away so that it would not be too steep. This was dismantled after the temple was constructed. But the residents of the area remembered the experience of the construction of the temple for a long time. Even now a village near the temple is called Karupalam, the village of the incline. Importance of water. The Persian terms abat, populated, prosperous, and abadi, flourishing, are both derived from the word ab, meaning water. 6. Towns, traders and craftspersons. What would a traveler visiting a medieval town expect to find? This would depend on what kind of a town it was: a temple town, an administrative center, a commercial town or a port town, to name just some possibilities. In fact, many towns combined several functions. They were administrative centers, temple towns, as well as centers of commercial activities and craft production. Administrative centers. You read about the Chola dynasty in Chapter 2. Let us travel in our imagination to Tanjavur, the capital of the Cholas, as it was 1,000 years ago. The perennial river Kaveri flows near this beautiful town. One hears the bells of the Rudrakeshvara temple built by King Rajaraja Chola. The townspeople are all praised for its architect Kunjaramalan Rajaraja Paranthachan, who has proudly carved his name on the temple wall. Inside is a massive Shiva Linga. Besides the temple, there are palaces with mandapas or pavilions. Kings hold court in these mandapas, issuing orders to their subordinates. There are also barracks for the army. The town is bustling with markets selling grain, spices, cloth, and jewelry. Water supply for the town comes from wells and tanks. The Salya weavers of Tanjavur and the nearby town of Urayur are busy producing cloth for flags to be used in the temple festival, fine cottons for the king and nobility, and coarse cotton for the masses. Some distance away at Svamimalai, the sthapitis, or sculptors, are making exquisite bronze idols and tall, ornamental bell metal lamps. Temple towns and pilgrimage centers. Tanjavur is also an example of a temple town. Temple towns represent a very important pattern of urbanization, the process by which cities develop. Temples were often central to the economy and society. Rulers built temples to demonstrate their devotion to various deities. They also endowed temples with grants of land and money to carry out elaborate rituals, feed pilgrims and priests, and celebrate festivals. Pilgrims who flocked to the temples also made donations. Temple authorities used their wealth to finance trade and banking. Gradually, a large number of priests, workers, artisans, traders, etc., settled near the temple to cater to its needs and those of the pilgrims. Thus grew temple towns. Towns emerged around temples such as those of Bhilasvaman, Bhilsa or Vidisa in Madhya Pradesh, and Somnath in Gujarat. Other important temple towns included Kanchipuram and Madurai in Tamil Nadu, and Tirupati in Andhra Pradesh. Pilgrimage centers also slowly developed into townships. Vrindavan, Uttar Pradesh, and Tiruvannamalai, Tamil Nadu, are examples of two such towns. Ajmer, Rajasthan, was the capital of the Chauhan kings in the 12th century and later became the Suba headquarters under the Mughals. It provides an excellent example of religious coexistence. Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti, the celebrated Sufi saint who settled there in the 12th century, attracted devotees from all creeds. Near Ajmer is a lake, Pushkar, which has attracted pilgrims from ancient times. A network of small towns. From the 8th century onwards, the subcontinent was dotted with several small towns. These probably emerged from large villages. They usually had a mandapika, or mandi of later times, to which nearby villagers brought their produce to sell. They also had market streets called hata, a hat of later times, lined with shops. Besides, there were streets for different kinds of artisans such as potters, oil pressers, sugar makers, toddy makers, smiths, stonemasons, etc. While some traders lived in the town, others traveled from town to town. Many came from far and near to these towns to buy local articles and sell products of distant places like horses, salt, camphor, saffron, betel nut, and spices like pepper. Usually a Samanta or, in later times, a Zamindar built a fortified palace in or near these towns. They levied taxes on traders, artisans, and articles of trade, and sometimes donated the right to collect these taxes to local temples, which had been built by themselves or by rich merchants. These rights were recorded in inscriptions that have survived to this day. Traders big and small. There were many kinds of traders. These included the Banjaras. Several traders, especially horse traders, formed associations, with headmen who negotiated on their behalf with warriors who bought horses. Since traders had to pass through many kingdoms and forests, they usually traveled in caravans and formed guilds to protect their interests. There were several such guilds in South India from the 8th century onwards, the most famous being the Manigramam and Nanadesi. These guilds traded extensively both within the peninsula and with Southeast Asia and China. There were also communities like the Chettiars and the Marwari Oswal who went on to become the principal trading groups of the country. Gujarati traders, including the communities of Hindu Baniyas and Muslim Baras, traded extensively with the ports of the Red Sea, Persian Gulf, East Africa, Southeast Asia, and China. They sold textiles and spices in these ports and, in exchange, brought gold and ivory from Africa, and spices, tin, Chinese blue pottery and silver from Southeast Asia and China. The towns on the west coast were home to Arab, Persian, Chinese, Jewish, and Syrian Christian traders. Indian spices and cloth sold in the Red Sea ports were purchased by Italian traders and eventually reached European markets, fetching very high profits. Spices grown in tropical climates, pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, dried ginger, etc., became an important part of European cooking, and cotton cloth was very attractive. This eventually drew European traders to India. We will shortly read about how this changed the face of trading and towns. Crafts in towns. The craftspersons of Bidar were so famed for their inlay work in copper and silver that it came to be called Bidri. The Panchalas or Vishvakarma community, consisting of goldsmiths, bronzesmiths, blacksmiths, masons, and carpenters, were essential to the building of temples. They also played an important role in the construction of palaces, big buildings, tanks, and reservoirs. Similarly, weavers such as the Salyar or Kaikalars emerged as prosperous communities, making donations to temples. Some aspects of cloth making like cotton cleaning, spinning, and dyeing became specialized and independent crafts. A closer look: Hampi, Masulipattnam, and Surat. The architectural splendor of Hampi. Hampi is located in the Krishna-Tungabhadra basin, which formed the nucleus of the Vijayanagara Empire, founded in 1336. The magnificent ruins at Hampi reveal a well-fortified city. No mortar or cementing agent was used in the construction of these walls, and the technique followed was to wedge them together by interlocking. The architecture of Hampi was distinctive. The buildings in the royal complex had splendid arches, domes, and pillared halls with niches for holding sculptures. They also had well-planned orchards and pleasure gardens with sculptural motifs such as the lotus and corbels. In its heyday in the 15th–16th centuries, Hampi bustled with commercial and cultural activities. Moors, a name used collectively for Muslim merchants, chettis, and agents of European traders such as the Portuguese, thronged the markets of Hampi. Temples were the hub of cultural activities, and devadasis, temple dancers, performed before the deity, royalty, and masses in the many pillared halls in the Virupaksha, a form of Shiva, temple. The Mahanavami festival, known today as Navaratri in the south, was one of the most important festivals celebrated at Hampi. Archaeologists have found the Mahanavami platform where the king received guests and accepted tribute from subordinate chiefs. From here he also watched dance and music performances as well as wrestling bouts. Hampi fell into ruin following the defeat of Vijayanagara in 1565 by the Deccani Sultans, the rulers of Golconda, Bijapur, Ahmednagar, Berar, and Bidar. A gateway to the west, Surat. Surat in Gujarat was the emporium of western trade during the Mughal period, along with Cambay, present-day Kambat, and somewhat later, Ahmedabad. Surat was the gateway for trade with West Asia via the Gulf of Ormuz. Surat has also been called the gate to Mecca because many pilgrim ships set sail from here. The city was cosmopolitan and people of all castes and creeds lived there. In the 17th century the Portuguese, Dutch, and English had their factories and warehouses at Surat. According to the English chronicler Ovington, who wrote an account of the port in 1689, on average 100 ships of different countries could be found anchored at the port at any given time. There were also several retail and wholesale shops selling cotton textiles. The textiles of Surat were famous for their gold lace borders, zari, and had a market in West Asia, Africa, and Europe. The state built numerous rest houses to take care of the needs of people from all over the world who came to the city. There were magnificent buildings and innumerable pleasure parks. The Kathiawad or Mahajans, money changers, had huge banking houses at Surat. It is noteworthy that the Surat Hundis were honored in the Farof markets of Cairo in Egypt, Basra in Iraq, and Antwerp in Belgium. However, Surat began to decline towards the end of the 17th century. This was because of many factors: the loss of markets and productivity because of the decline of the Mughal Empire, control of the sea routes by the Portuguese, and competition from Bombay, present-day Mumbai, where the English East India Company shifted its headquarters in 1668. Today, Surat is a bustling commercial centre. Fishing in troubled waters, Masulipattnam. The town of Masulipattnam or Maklipatnam, literally, fish port town, lay on the delta of the Krishna River. In the 17th century it was a centre of intense activity. Both the Dutch and English East India Companies attempted to control Masulipattnam as it became the most important port on the Andhra coast. The fort at Masulipattnam was built by the Dutch. The Qutb Shahi rulers of Golconda imposed royal monopolies on the sale of textiles, spices, and other items to prevent the trade passing completely into the hands of the various East India Companies. Fierce competition among various trading groups, the Golconda nobles, Persian merchants, Telugu Komati Chettis, and European traders made the city populous and prosperous. As the Mughals began to extend their power to Golconda, their representative, the governor Mir Jumla, who was also a merchant, began to play off the Dutch and the English against each other. In 1686 to 1687, Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb annexed Golconda. This caused the European companies to look for alternatives. It was a part of the new policy of the English East India Company that it was not enough if a port had connections with the production centres of the hinterland. The new company trade centres, it was felt, should combine political, administrative, and commercial roles. As the company traders moved to Bombay, Calcutta, present-day Kolkata, and Madras, present-day Chennai, Masulapatnam lost both its merchants and prosperity and declined in the course of the 18th century, being today nothing more than a dilapidated little town. New towns and traders. In the 16th and 17th centuries, European countries were searching for spices and textiles, which had become popular both in Europe and West Asia. The English, Dutch and French formed East India Companies in order to expand their commercial activities in the East. Initially, great Indian traders like Mullah Abdul Ghaffar and Virji Vora, who owned a large number of ships, competed with them. However, the European companies used their naval power to gain control of the sea trade and forced Indian traders to work as their agents. Ultimately, the English emerged as the most successful commercial and political power in the subcontinent. The spurt in demand for goods like textiles led to a great expansion of the crafts of spinning, weaving, bleaching, dyeing, etc. With more and more people taking them up, Indian textile designs became increasingly refined. However, this period also saw the decline of the independence of craftspersons. They now began to work on a system of advances, which meant that they had to weave cloth which was already promised to European agents. Weavers no longer had the liberty of selling their own cloth or weaving their own patterns. They had to reproduce the designs supplied to them by the company agents. The 18th century saw the rise of Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras, which are nodal cities today. Crafts and commerce underwent major changes as merchants and artisans, such as weavers, were moved into the black towns established by the European companies within these new cities. The blacks or native traders and craftspersons were confined here, while the white rulers occupied the superior residencies of Fort St. George in Madras or Fort St. William in Calcutta. The story of crafts and commerce in the 18th century will be taken up next year. Elsewhere. Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus. In the 15th century, European sailors undertook unprecedented explorations of sea routes. They were driven by the desire to find ways of reaching the Indian subcontinent and obtaining spices. Vasco da Gama, a Portuguese sailor, was one of those who sailed across the Atlantic to the African coast, went round it, crossing over to the Indian Ocean. His first journey took more than a year. He reached Calicut in 1498, and returned to Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, the following year. He lost 2 of his 4 ships, and of the 170 men at the start of the journey, only 54 survived. In spite of the obvious hazards, the routes that were opened up proved to be extremely profitable, and he was followed by English, Dutch and French sailors. The search for sea routes to India had another, unexpected fallout. On the assumption that the earth was round, Christopher Columbus, an Italian, decided to sail westwards across the Atlantic Ocean to find a route to India. He landed in the West Indies, which got their name because of this confusion, in 1492. He was followed by sailors and conquerors from Spain and Portugal, who occupied large parts of Central and South America, often destroying earlier settlements in the area. Imagine you are planning a journey from Surat to West Asia in the 17th century. What are the arrangements you will make? Taxes on markets. The following is a summary from a 10th century inscription from Rajasthan, which lists the dues that were to be collected by temple authorities. There were taxes in kind on sugar and jaggery, dyes, thread, and cotton. On coconuts, salt, areca nuts, butter, sesame oil, on cloth. Besides, there were taxes on traders, on those who sold metal goods, on distillers, on oil, on cattle fodder, and on loads of grain. Some of these taxes were collected in kind, while others were collected in cash. Kabul. With its rugged, mountainous landscape, Kabul, in present-day Afghanistan, became politically and commercially important from the 16th century onwards. Kabul and Kandahar were linked to the celebrated Silk Route. Besides, trade in horses was primarily carried on through this route. In the 17th century, Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, a diamond merchant, estimated that the horse trade at Kabul amounted to Rs 30,000 annually, which was a huge sum in those days. Camels carried dried fruits, dates, carpets, silks and even fresh fruits from Kabul to the subcontinent and elsewhere. Slaves were also brought here for sale. The changing fortunes of towns. Some towns like Ahmedabad, Gujarat, went on to become major commercial cities, but others like Tanjavur shrank in size and importance over the centuries. Murshidabad, West Bengal, on the banks of the Bhagirathi, which rose to prominence as a centre for silks and became the capital of Bengal in 1704, declined in the course of the century as the weavers faced competition from cheap mill-made cloth from England. A fortified city. This is how a Portuguese traveller, Domingo Paes, described Hampi in the 16th century. At the entrance of the gate where those pass who come from Goa, this king has made within it a very strong city fortified with walls and towers. These walls are not like those of other cities, but are made of very strong masonry such as would be found in few other parts, and inside very beautiful rows of buildings made after their manner with flat roofs. Hundi is a note recording a deposit made by a person. The amount deposited can be claimed in another place by presenting the record of the deposit. Factor. Official merchant of the East India Company. A poor fisher town. This is a description of Masulaputnam by William Methwold, a factor of the English East India Company, in 1620. This is the chief port of Golconda, where the Right Worshipful East India Company have their agent. It is a small town but populous, unwalled, ill-built and worse situated, within all the springs are brackish. It was first a poor fisher town, afterwards, the convenience of the road, a place where ships can anchor, made it a residence for merchants and so continues since our and the Dutch nation frequented this coast. Bronze, bell metal and the lost wax technique. Bronze is an alloy containing copper and tin. Bell metal contains a greater proportion of tin than other kinds of bronze. This produces a bell-like sound. Chola bronze statues were made using the lost wax technique. First, an image was made of wax. This was covered with clay and allowed to dry. Next it was heated, and a tiny hole was made in the clay cover. The molten wax was drained out through this hole. Then molten metal was poured into the clay mold through the hole. Once the metal cooled and solidified, the clay cover was carefully removed, and the image was cleaned and polished. 7. Tribes, Omads and settled communities. You saw in chapters 2, 3, and 4 how kingdoms rose and fell. Even as this was happening, new arts, crafts, and production activities flourished in towns and villages. Over the centuries, important political, social, and economic developments had taken place. But social change was not the same everywhere, because different kinds of societies evolved differently. It is important to understand how, and why, this happened. In large parts of the subcontinent, society was already divided according to the rules of Varna. These rules, as prescribed by the Brahmanas, were accepted by the rulers of large kingdoms. The difference between the high and low, and between the rich and poor, increased. Under the Delhi sultans and the Mughals, this hierarchy between social classes grew further. Beyond big cities, tribal societies. There were, however, other kinds of societies as well. Many societies in the subcontinent did not follow the social rules and rituals prescribed by the Brahmanas. Nor were they divided into numerous unequal classes. Such societies are often called tribes. Members of each tribe were united by kinship bonds. Many tribes obtained their livelihood from agriculture. Others were hunter-gatherers or herders. Most often they combined these activities to make full use of the natural resources of the area in which they lived. Some tribes were nomadic and moved from one place to another. A tribal group controlled land and pastures jointly, and divided these amongst households according to its own rules. Many large tribes thrived in different parts of the subcontinent. They usually lived in forests, hills, deserts, and places difficult to reach. Sometimes they clashed with the more powerful caste-based societies. In various ways, the tribes retained their freedom and preserved their separate culture. But the caste-based and tribal societies also depended on each other for their diverse needs. This relationship of conflict and dependence gradually caused both societies to change. Who were tribal people? Contemporary historians and travelers give very scanty information about tribes. A few exceptions apart, tribal people did not keep written records. But they preserved rich customs and oral traditions. These were passed down to each new generation. Present-day historians have started using such oral traditions to write tribal histories. Tribal people were found in almost every region of the subcontinent. The area and influence of a tribe varied at different points of time. Some powerful tribes controlled large territories. In Punjab, the Khakar tribe was very influential during the 13th and 14th centuries. Later, the Gakhars became more important. Their chief, Kamal Khan Gakhar, was made a noble, Mansabdar, by Emperor Akbar. In Multan and Sindh, the Longas and Arguns dominated extensive regions before they were subdued by the Mughals. The Balokis were another large and powerful tribe in the northwest. They were divided into many smaller clans under different chiefs. In the western Himalaya lived the shepherd tribe of Gaddis. The distant northeastern part of the subcontinent too was entirely dominated by tribes the Nagas, Ahums and many others. In many areas of present-day Bihar and Jharkhand, Kiro chiefdoms had emerged by the 12th century. Raja Man Singh, Akbar's famous general, attacked and defeated the Kiros in 1591. A large amount of booty was taken from them, but they were not entirely subdued. Under Aurangzeb, Mughal forces captured many Kiro fortresses and subjugated the tribe. The Mundas and Santals were among the other important tribes that lived in this region and also in Orissa and Bengal. The Maharashtra highlands and Karnataka were home to Kalas, Birids and numerous others. Kalas also lived in many areas of Gujarat. Further south there were large tribal populations of Koragas, Vetars, Maravars and many others. The large tribe of Bhils was spread across western and central India. By the late 16th century, many of them had become settled agriculturists and some even zamindars. Many Bhil clans, nevertheless, remained hunter-gatherers. The Gonds were found in great numbers across the present-day states of Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Andhra Pradesh. How Omads and Mobile people lived. Omadic pastoralists moved over long distances with their animals. They lived on milk and other pastoral products. They also exchanged wool, ghee, etc., with settled agriculturists for grain, cloth, utensils, and other products. They bought and sold these goods as they moved from one place to another, transporting them on their animals. The Banjaras were the most important trader nomads. Their caravan was called Tanda. Sultan Alauddin Khalji used the Banjaras to transport grain to the city markets. Emperor Jahangir wrote in his memoirs that the Banjaras carried grain on their bullocks from different areas and sold it in towns. They transported food grain for the Mughal army during military campaigns. With a large army there could be 100,000 bullocks carrying grain. Many pastoral tribes reared and sold animals, such as cattle and horses, to the prosperous people. Different castes of petty peddlers also traveled from village to village. They made and sold wares such as ropes, reeds, straw matting, and coarse sacks. Sometimes mendicants acted as wandering merchants. There were castes of entertainers who performed in different towns and villages for their livelihood. Changing society, EU castes and hierarchies. As the economy and the needs of society grew, people with new skills were required. Smaller castes, or jatis, emerged within varnas. For example, new castes appeared amongst the Brahmanas. On the other hand, many tribes and social groups were taken into caste-based society and given the status of jatis. Specialized artisans, smiths, carpenters, and masons were also recognized as separate jatis by the Brahmanas. Jatis, rather than varna, became the basis for organizing society. Among the Kshatriyas, new Rajput clans became powerful by the 11th and 12th centuries. They belonged to different lineages, such as Hunas, Chandelas, Chalukyas, and others. Some of these, too, had been tribes earlier. Many of these clans came to be regarded as Rajputs. They gradually replaced the older rulers, especially in agricultural areas. Here a developed society was emerging, and rulers used their wealth to create powerful states. The rise of Rajput clans to the position of rulers set an example for the tribal people to follow. Gradually, with the support of the Brahmanas, many tribes became part of the caste system. But only the leading tribal families could join the ruling class. A large majority joined the lower jatis of caste society. On the other hand, many dominant tribes of Punjab, Sindh, and the northwest frontier had adopted Islam quite early. They continued to reject the caste system. The unequal social order, prescribed by orthodox Hinduism, was not widely accepted in these areas. The emergence of states is closely related to social change amongst tribal people. Two examples of this important part of our history are described below. A closer look. The Gonds. The Gonds lived in a vast forested region called Gondwana, or country inhabited by Gonds. They practiced shifting cultivation. The large Gond tribe was further divided into many smaller clans. Each clan had its own Raja or Rai. About the time that the power of the Delhi sultans was declining, a few large Gond kingdoms were beginning to dominate the smaller Gond chiefs. The Akbarnama, a history of Akbar's reign, mentions the Gond kingdom of Garha Katanga that had 70,000 villages. The administrative system of these kingdoms was becoming centralized. The kingdom was divided into Garhas. Each Garha was controlled by a particular Gond clan. This was further divided into units of 84 villages called Shrazai. The Shrazai was subdivided into Barhats, which were made up of 12 villages each. The emergence of large states changed the nature of Gond society. Their basically equal society gradually got divided into unequal social classes. Brahmanas received land grants from the Gond Rajas and became more influential. The Gond chiefs now wished to be recognized as Rajputs. So, Aman Das, the Gond Raja of Garha Katanga, assumed the title of Sangram Shah. His son, Dalpat, married Princess Durgawati, the daughter of Salbahan, the Chandal Rajput Raja of Mahoba. Dalpat, however, died early. Rani Durgawati was very capable, and started ruling on behalf of her 5-year-old son, Burnarain. Under her, the kingdom became even more extensive. In 1565, the Mughal forces under Asaf Khan attacked Garha Katanga. A strong resistance was put up by Rani Durgawati. She was defeated and preferred to die rather than surrender. Her son, too, died fighting soon after. Garha Katanga was a rich state. It earned much wealth by trapping and exporting wild elephants to other kingdoms. When the Mughals defeated the Gonds, they captured a huge booty of precious coins and elephants. They annexed part of the kingdom and granted the rest to Chandra Shah, an uncle of Burnarain. Despite the fall of Garha Katanga, the Gond kingdoms survived for some time. However, they became much weaker and later struggled unsuccessfully against the stronger Bundelis and Marathas. The Ahums. The Ahums migrated to the Brahmaputra Valley from present-day Myanmar in the 13th century. They created a new state by suppressing the older political system of the Buyans, landlords. During the 16th century, they annexed the kingdoms of the Chhudayas, 1523, and of Kukhajou, 1581, and subjugated many other tribes. The Ahoms built a large state, and for this they used firearms as early as the 1530s. By the 1660s they could even make high-quality gunpowder and cannons. However, the Ahoms faced many invasions from the southwest. In 1662, the Mughals under Mir Jumla attacked the Ahom kingdom. Despite their brave defense, the Ahoms were defeated. But direct Mughal control over the region could not last long. The Ahom state depended upon forced labor. Those forced to work for the state were called Paiks. A census of the population was taken. Each village had to send a number of Paiks by rotation. People from heavily populated areas were shifted to less populated places. Ahom clans were thus broken up. By the first half of the 17th century the administration became quite centralized. Almost all adult males served in the army during war. At other times, they were engaged in building dams, irrigation systems and other public works. The Ahoms also introduced new methods of rice cultivation. Ahom society was divided into clans or kuls. There were very few castes of artisans, so artisans in the Ahom areas came from the adjoining kingdoms. A kul often controlled several villages. The peasant was given land by his village community. Even the king could not take it away without the community's consent. Originally, the Ahoms worshipped their own tribal gods. During the first half of the 17th century, however, the influence of Brahmanas increased. Temples and Brahmanas were granted land by the king. In the reign of Sib Singh, 1714 to 1744, Hinduism became the predominant religion. But the Ahom kings did not completely give up their traditional beliefs after adopting Hinduism. Ahom society was very sophisticated. Poets and scholars were given land grants. Theatre was encouraged. Important works of Sanskrit were translated into the local language. Historical works, known as Burunjis, were also written first in the Ahom language and then in Assamese. Conclusion. Considerable social change took place in the subcontinent during the period we have been examining. Varna-based society and tribal people constantly interacted with each other. This interaction caused both kinds of societies to adapt and change. There were many different tribes and they took up diverse livelihoods. Over a period of time, many of them merged with caste-based society. Others, however, rejected both the caste system and orthodox Hinduism. Some tribes established extensive states with well-organized systems of administration. They thus became politically powerful. This brought them into conflict with larger and more complex kingdoms and empires. Elsewhere. The Mongols. Find Mongolia in your atlas. The best-known pastoral and hunter-gatherer tribe in history were the Mongols. They inhabited the grasslands, steppes, of Central Asia and the forested areas further north. By 1206 Genghis Khan had united the Mongol and Turkish tribes into a powerful military force. At the time of his death, 1227, he was the ruler of extensive territories. His successors created a vast empire. At different points of time, it included parts of Russia, Eastern Europe, and also China and much of West Asia. The Mongols had well-organized military and administrative systems. These were based on the support of different ethnic and religious groups. Imagine. You are a member of a nomadic community that shifts residence every 3 months. How would this change your life? Clan. A clan is a group of families or households claiming descent from a common ancestor. Tribal organization is often based on kinship or clan loyalties. Nomads and itinerant groups. Nomads are wandering people. Many of them are pastoralists who roam from one pasture to another with their flocks and herds. Similarly, itinerant groups, such as craftspersons, peddlers, and entertainers travel from place to place practicing their different occupations. Both nomads and itinerant groups often visit the same places every year. The Banjaras. Peter Mundy, an English trader who came to India during the early 17th century, has described the Banjaras. In the morning we met a tanda of Banjaras with 14,000 oxen. They were all laden with grains such as wheat and rice. These Banjaras carry their household wives and children along with them. One tanda consists of many families. Their way of life is similar to that of carriers who continuously travel from place to place. They own their oxen. They are sometimes hired by merchants, but most commonly they are themselves merchants. They buy grain where it is cheaply available and carry it to places where it is dearer. From there, they again reload their oxen with anything that can be profitably sold in other places. In a tanda there may be as many as 600 or 700 persons. They do not travel more than 6 or 7 miles a day too, in the cool weather. After unloading their oxen, they turn them free to graze as there is enough land here, and no one there to forbid them. Deliberations on Jatai. A 12th century inscription from Oiyakandan Udayar, in Tiruchirappalli Talika, in present-day Tamil Nadu, describes the deliberations in a Sabha of Brahmanas. They deliberated on the status of a group known as Rathakaras, literally, chariot makers. They laid down their occupations, which were to include architecture, building coaches and chariots, erecting gateways for temples with images in them, preparing wooden equipment used to perform sacrifices, building mandapas, making jewels for the king. Shifting cultivation. Trees and bushes in a forest area are first cut and burnt. The crop is sown in the ashes. When this land loses its fertility, another plot of land is cleared and planted in the same way. 8. Devotional paths. To the divine. You may have seen people perform rituals of worship, or singing bhajans, kirtans, or kawali, or even repeating the name of God in silence, and noticed that some of them are moved to tears. Such intense devotion or love of God is the legacy of various kinds of bhakti and Sufi movements that have evolved since the 8th century. The idea of a supreme God. Before large kingdoms emerged, different groups of people worshipped their own gods and goddesses. As people were brought together through the growth of towns, trade, and empires, new ideas began to develop. The idea that all living things pass through countless cycles of birth and rebirth performing good deeds and bad came to be widely accepted. Similarly, the idea that all human beings are not equal even at birth gained ground during this period. The belief that social privileges came from birth in a noble family or a high caste was the subject of many learned texts. Many people were uneasy with such ideas and turned to the teachings of the Buddha or the Jainas, according to which it was possible to overcome social differences and break the cycle of rebirth through personal effort. Others felt attracted to the idea of a supreme God who could deliver humans from such bondage if approached with devotion, or bhakti. This idea, advocated in the Bhagavad Gita, grew in popularity in the early centuries of the Common Era. Shiva, Vishnu, and Durga as supreme deities came to be worshipped through elaborate rituals. At the same time, gods and goddesses worshipped in different areas came to be identified with Shiva, Vishnu or Durga. In the process, local myths and legends became a part of the Puranic stories, and methods of worship recommended in the Puranas were introduced into the local cults. Eventually the Puranas also laid down that it was possible for devotees to receive the grace of God regardless of their caste status. The idea of bhakti became so popular that even Buddhists and Jainas adopted these beliefs. A new kind of bhakti in South India, Ayyanars and Alvars. The 7th to 9th centuries saw the emergence of new religious movements, led by the Nayanars, saints devoted to Shiva, and Alvars, saints devoted to Vishnu, who came from all castes including those considered untouchable like the Pulayar and the Panars. They were sharply critical of the Buddhists and Jainas and preached ardent love of Shiva or Vishnu as the path to salvation. They drew upon the ideals of love and heroism as found in the Sangam literature, the earliest example of Tamil literature, composed during the early centuries of the Common Era, and blended them with the values of bhakti. The Nayanars and Alvars went from place to place composing exquisite poems in praise of the deities enshrined in the villages they visited, and set them to music. Ayanars and Alvars. There were 63 Nayanars, who belonged to different caste backgrounds such as potters, untouchable workers, peasants, hunters, soldiers, brahmanas, and chiefs. The best known among them were Appar, Samba Ndar, Sundarar and Manikavasagar. There are 2 sets of compilations of their songs Tavaram and Tiravakakam. There were 12 Alvars, who came from equally divergent backgrounds, the best known being Puri Alvar, his daughter Endal, Tondaradapadai Alvar, and Nam Alvar. Their songs were compiled in the Divya Prabandham. Between the 10th and 12th centuries the Chola and Pandya kings built elaborate temples around many of the shrines visited by the saint poets, strengthening the links between the Bhakti tradition and temple worship. This was also the time when their poems were compiled. Besides, hagiographies or religious biographies of the Alvars and Nayanars were also composed. Today we use these texts as sources for writing histories of the Bhakti tradition. Philosophy and Bhakti. Shankara, one of the most influential philosophers of India, was born in Kerala in the 8th century. He was an advocate of Advaita or the doctrine of the oneness of the individual soul and the supreme God which is the ultimate reality. He taught that Brahman, the only or ultimate reality, was formless and without any attributes. He considered the world around us to be an illusion or maya, and preached renunciation of the world and adoption of the path of knowledge to understand the true nature of Brahman and attain salvation. Ramanuja, born in Tamil Nadu in the 11th century, was deeply influenced by the Alvars. According to him the best means of attaining salvation was through intense devotion to Vishnu. Vishnu in his grace helps the devotee to attain the bliss of union with him. He propounded the doctrine of Vishishtadvaita or qualified oneness in that the soul even when united with the Supreme God remained distinct. Ramanuja's doctrine greatly inspired the new strand of Bhakti which developed in North India subsequently. Basavanas Virashaivism. We noted earlier the connection between the Tamil Bhakti movement and temple worship. This in turn led to a reaction that is best represented in the Virashaiva movement initiated by Basavana and his companions like Alama Prabhu and Akama Hadavi. This movement began in Karnataka in the mid-12th century. They, Virashaivas, argued strongly for the equality of all human beings and against Brahmanical ideas about caste and the treatment of women. They were also against all forms of ritual and idol worship. The saints of Maharashtra. From the 13th to the 17th centuries Maharashtra saw a great number of saint poets, whose songs in simple Marathi continue to inspire people. The most important among them were Jnaneshwar, Namdev, Eknath and Tukaram as well as women like Sakyabai and the family of Chakamila, who belonged to the untouchable Mahar caste. This regional tradition of Bhakti focused on the Vithala, a form of Vishnu, temple in Pandharpa, as well as on the notion of a personal God residing in the hearts of all people. These saint poets rejected all forms of ritualism, outward display of piety and social differences based on birth. In fact, they even rejected the idea of renunciation and preferred to live with their families, earning their livelihood like any other person, while humbly serving fellow human beings in need. A new humanist idea emerged as they insisted that bhakti lay in sharing others' pain. As the famous Gujarati saint Narsai Mehta said, they are Vaishnavas who understand the pain of others. Athpanthis, Siddhas, and Yogis. A number of religious groups that emerged during this period criticized the ritual and other aspects of conventional religion and the social order, using simple, logical arguments. Among them were the Nathpanthis, Siddhakaras, and Yogis. They advocated renunciation of the world. To them the path to salvation lay in meditation on the formless ultimate reality and the realization of oneness with it. To achieve this they advocated intense training of the mind and body through practices like yogasanas, breathing exercises, and meditation. These groups became particularly popular among low castes. Their criticism of conventional religion created the ground for devotional religion to become a popular force in northern India. Islam and Sufism. The Sants had much in common with the Sufis, so much so that it is believed that they adopted many ideas of each other. Sufis were Muslim mystics. They rejected outward religiosity and emphasized love and devotion to God and compassion towards all fellow human beings. Islam propagated strict monotheism or submission to one God. It also rejected idol worship and considerably simplified rituals of worship into collective prayers. At the same time, Muslim scholars developed a holy law called Shariat. The Sufis often rejected the elaborate rituals and codes of behavior demanded by Muslim religious scholars. They sought union with God much as a lover seeks his beloved with a disregard for the world. Like the saint poets, the Sufis too composed poems expressing their feelings, and a rich literature in prose, including anecdotes and fables, developed around them. Among the great Sufis of Central Asia were Ghazali, Rumi and Sidi. Like the Nathpanthes, Siddhas, and Yogis, the Sufis too believed that the heart can be trained to look at the world in a different way. They developed elaborate methods of training using zikr, chanting of a name or sacred formula, contemplation, sama, singing, raqs, dancing, discussion of parables, breath control, etc. under the guidance of a master or pir. Thus emerged the Silsilas, a genealogy of Sufi teachers, each following a slightly different method, tariqa, of instruction and ritual practice. A large number of Sufis from Central Asia settled in Hindustan from the 11th century onwards. This process was strengthened with the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate, when several major Sufi centers developed all over the subcontinent. The Chishti Silsila was among the most influential orders. It had a long line of teachers like Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti of Ajmer, Qutbuddin Bakhtiar Kaki of Delhi, Baba Farid of Punjab, Khwaja Nizamuddin Auliya of Delhi and Banda Nawaz Jasudaraz of Gulbarga. The Sufi masters held their assemblies in their khanqahs or hospices. Devotees of all descriptions including members of the royalty and nobility, and ordinary people flocked to these khanqahs. They discussed spiritual matters, sought the blessings of the saints in solving their worldly problems, or simply attended the music and dance sessions. Often people attributed Sufi masters with miraculous powers that could relieve others of their illnesses and troubles. The tomb or dargah of a Sufi saint became a place of pilgrimage to which thousands of people of all faiths thronged. New religious developments in North India. The period after the 13th century saw a new wave of the Bhakti movement in North India. This was an age when Islam, Brahmanical Hinduism, Sufism, various strands of Bhakti, and the Nathpanths, Siddhas, and Yogis influenced one another. We saw that new towns and kingdoms were emerging, and people were taking up new professions and finding new roles for themselves. Such people, especially craftspersons, peasants, traders, and laborers, thronged to listen to these new saints and spread their ideas. Some of them like Kabir and Baba Guru Nanak rejected all orthodox religions. Others like Tulsidas and Surdash accepted existing beliefs and practices but wanted to make these accessible to all. Tulsidas conceived of God in the form of Rama. Tulsidas composition, the Ramcharit Manas, written in Awadhi, a language used in eastern Uttar Pradesh, is important both as an expression of his devotion and as a literary work. Surdash was an ardent devotee of Krishna. His compositions, compiled in the Sursagara, Surasaravali, and Sahitya Lahari, express his devotion. Also contemporary was Shankaradeva of Assam, late 15th century, who emphasized devotion to Vishnu, and composed poems and plays in Assamese. He began the practice of setting up namgars or houses of recitation and prayer, a practice that continues to date. This tradition also included saints like Dadadale, Ravidas, and Mirabai. Mirabai was a Rajput princess married into the royal family of Mewar in the 16th century. Mirabai became a disciple of Ravidas, a saint from a caste considered untouchable. She was devoted to Krishna and composed innumerable bhajans expressing her intense devotion. Her songs also openly challenged the norms of the upper castes and became popular with the masses in Rajasthan and Gujarat. A unique feature of most of the saints is that their works were composed in regional languages and could be sung. They became immensely popular and were handed down orally from generation to generation. Usually the poorest, most deprived communities and women transmitted these songs, often adding their own experiences. Thus the songs as we have them today are as much a creation of the saints as of generations of people who sang them. They have become a part of our living popular culture. A closer look, Kabir. Kabir, who probably lived in the 15th-16th centuries, was one of the most influential saints. He was brought up in a family of Muslim julahas or weavers settled in or near the city of Benares, Varanasi. We have little reliable information about his life. We get to know of his ideas from a vast collection of verses called Sakais and Pads said to have been composed by him and sung by wandering Bajan singers. Some of these were later collected and preserved in the Guru Granth Sahib, Panchvani, and Bijak. Kabir's teachings were based on a complete, indeed vehement, rejection of the major religious traditions. His teachings openly ridiculed all forms of external worship of both Brahmanical Hinduism and Islam, the preeminence of the priestly classes and the caste system. The language of his poetry was a form of spoken Hindi widely understood by ordinary people. He also sometimes used cryptic language, which is difficult to follow. Kabir believed in a formless supreme God and preached that the only path to salvation was through bhakti or devotion. Kabir drew his followers from among both Hindus and Muslims. A closer look, Baba Guru Nanak. We know more about Guru Nanak, 1469 to 1539, than about Kabir. Born at Talwandi, Nankana Sahib in Pakistan, he travelled widely before establishing a centre at Kartarpur, Dera Baba Nanak on the river Ravi. A regular worship that consisted of the singing of his own hymns was established there. For his followers, irrespective of their former creed, caste, or gender, his followers ate together in the common kitchen, langar. The sacred space thus created by Guru Nanak was known as Dharmsal. It is now known as Gurdwara. Before his death in 1539, Guru Nanak appointed one of his followers as his successor. His name was Lena, but he came to be known as Guru Angad, signifying that he was a part of Guru Nanak himself. Guru Angad compiled the compositions of Guru Nanak, to which he added his own in a new script known as Gurmukhi. The three successors of Guru Angad also wrote under the name of Nanak, and all of their compositions were compiled by Guru Arjan in 1604. To this compilation were added the writings of other figures like Sheikh Farid, Sant Kabir, Bhagat Namdev, and Guru Tegh Bahadur. In 1706 this compilation was authenticated by his son and successor, Guru Gobind Singh. It is now known as Guru Granth Sahib, the holy scripture of the Sikhs. The number of Guru Nanak's followers increased through the 16th century. Under his successors, they belonged to a number of castes, but traders, agriculturists, artisans, and craftsmen predominated. This may have something to do with Guru Nanak's insistence that his followers must be householders and should adopt productive and useful occupations. They were also expected to contribute to the general funds of the community of followers. By the beginning of the 17th century, the town of Ramdaspur, Amritsar, had developed around the central Gurdwara called Harmandir Sahib, Golden Temple. It was virtually self-governing, and modern historians refer to the early 17th century Sikh community as a state within the state. The Mughal Emperor Jahangir looked upon them as a potential threat, and he ordered the execution of Guru Arjan in 1606. The Sikh movement began to get politicized in the 17th century, a development which culminated in the institution of the Khalsa by Guru Gobind Singh in 1699. The community of the Sikhs, called the Khalsa Panth, became a political entity. The changing historical situation during the 16th and 17th centuries influenced the development of the Sikh movement. The ideas of Guru Nanak had a huge impact on this development from the very beginning. He emphasized the importance of the worship of one God. He insisted that caste, creed, or gender was irrelevant for attaining liberation. His idea of liberation was not that of a state of inert bliss, but rather the pursuit of active life with a strong sense of social commitment. He himself used the terms Nam, Dan, and Isnan for the essence of his teaching, which actually meant right worship, welfare of others, and purity of conduct. His teachings are now remembered as Namjapna, Kirtkarna, and Vanchakna, which also underline the importance of right belief and worship, honest living, and helping others. Thus, Guru Nanak's idea of equality had social and political implications. This might partly explain the difference between the history of the followers of Guru Nanak and the history of the followers of the other religious figures of the medieval centuries, like Kabir, Ravidas, and Datu, whose ideas were very similar to those of Guru Nanak. Elsewhere, Martin Luther and the Reformation. The 16th century was a time of religious ferment in Europe as well. One of the most important leaders of the changes that took place within Christianity was Martin Luther, 1483 to 1546. Luther felt that several practices in the Roman Catholic Church went against the teachings of the Bible. He encouraged the use of the language of ordinary people rather than Latin, and translated the Bible into German. Luther was strongly opposed to the practice of indulgences or making donations to the Church so as to gain forgiveness from sins. His writings were widely disseminated with the growing use of the printing press. Many Protestant Christian sects trace their origins to the teachings of Luther. Hagiography. Writing of Saints Lives. The Devotee and the Lord. This is a composition of Manikava Sagar. Into my vile body of flesh you came, as though it were a temple of gold, and soothed me wholly and saved me. O Lord of grace, O gem most pure! Sorrow and birth and death and illusion you took from me, and set me free. O bliss! O light! I have taken refuge in you, and never can I be parted from you. Virashaiva Vachanas. These are vachanas or sayings attributed to Basavana. The rich will make temples for Shiva. What shall I, a poor man, do? My legs are pillars, the body the shrine, the head a cupola of gold. Listen, O Lord of the meeting rivers, things standing shall fall, but the moving ever shall stay. Questioning the social order. This is an Abhang, Marathi devotional hymn, of Sant Tukaram. He who identifies with the battered and the beaten mark him as a saint. For God is with him. He holds every forsaken man close to his heart. He treats a slave as his own son. Says Tuka. I will not be tired to repeat again, such a man is God in person. Here is an Abhang composed by Chakamila's son. You made us low caste. Why do not you face that fact, great Lord? Our whole life left over food to eat. You should be ashamed of this. You have eaten in our home. How can you deny it? Chaka's son, Karmamala asks. Why did you give me life? Hospice. House of rest for travelers, especially one kept by a religious order. Finding the Lord. Jalaluddin Rumi was a great 13th century Sufi poet from Iran who wrote in Persian. Here is an excerpt from his work. He was not on the cross of the Christians. I went to the Hindu temples. In none of them was there any sign. He was not on the heights or in the lowlands. I went to the Kaaba of Mecca. He was not there. I asked about him from Avicenna the philosopher. He was beyond the range of Avicenna. I looked into my heart. In that, his place, I saw him. He was in no other place. Beyond the Rana's palace. This is a song composed by Mirabai. Ranaji, I have left your norms of shame, and false decorum of the princely life. I have left your town. And yet Rana, why have you kept up enmity against me? Rana, you gave me a cup of poison. I drank it laughing. Rana, I will not be destroyed by you. And yet Rana, why have you kept up enmity against me? In search of the true Lord. Here is a composition of Kabir. O Alaram, present in all living beings, have mercy on your servants, O Lord. Why bump your head on the ground? Why bathe your body in water? You kill and you call yourself humble. But your vices you conceal. 24 times the Brahmana keeps the Ekadasi fast. While the Qazi observes the Ramzan, tell me why does he set aside the 11 months to seek spiritual fruit in the 12th? Hari dwells in the east, they say, and Allah resides in the west. Search for him in your heart, in the heart of your heart, there he dwells, Rahim Ram. 9. The making of regional cultures. One of the commonest ways of describing people is in terms of the language they speak. When we refer to a person as a Tamil or an Oriya, this usually means that he or she speaks Tamil or Oriya and lives in Tamil Nadu or Orissa. We also tend to associate each region with distinctive kinds of food, clothes, poetry, dance, music, and painting. Sometimes we take these identities for granted and assume that they have existed from time immemorial. However, the frontiers separating regions have evolved over time, and in fact are still changing. Also, what we understand as regional cultures today are often the product of complex processes of intermixing of local traditions with ideas from other parts of the subcontinent. As we will see, some traditions appear specific to some regions, others seem to be similar across regions, and yet others derive from older practices in a particular area, but take a new form in other regions. The Cheras and the development of Malayalam. Let us begin by looking at an example of the connection between language and region. The Chera kingdom of Mahodayapuram was established in the 9th century in the southwestern part of the peninsula, part of present-day Kerala. It is likely that Malayalam was spoken in this area. The rulers introduced the Malayalam language and script in their inscriptions. In fact, this is one of the earliest examples of the use of a regional language in official records in the subcontinent. At the same time, the Cheras also drew upon Sanskritic traditions. The temple theatre of Kerala, which is traced to this period, borrowed stories from the Sanskrit epics. The first literary works in Malayalam, dated to about the 12th century, are directly indebted to Sanskrit. Interestingly enough, a 14th century text, the Lila Tilakam, dealing with grammar and poetics, was composed in Manipravalam, literally, diamonds and corals, referring to the two languages, Sanskrit and the regional language. Rulers and religious traditions, the Jagannatha cult. In other regions, regional cultures grew around religious traditions. The best example of this process is the cult of Jagannatha, literally, Lord of the World, a name for Vishnu, at Puri, Orissa. To date, the local tribal people make the wooden image of the deity, which suggests that the deity was originally a local god, who was later identified with Vishnu. In the 12th century, one of the most important rulers of the Ganga dynasty, Anantavarman, decided to erect a temple for Purushottama Jagannatha at Puri. Subsequently, in 1230, King Anangabhim III dedicated his kingdom to the deity and proclaimed himself as the deputy of the god. As the temple gained in importance as a center of pilgrimage, its authority in social and political matters also increased. All those who conquered Orissa, such as the Mughals, the Marathas, and the English East India Company, attempted to gain control over the temple. They felt that this would make their rule acceptable to the local people. The Rajputs and traditions of heroism. In the 19th century, the region that constitutes most of present-day Rajasthan was called Rajputana by the British. While this may suggest that this was an area that was inhabited only or mainly by Rajputs, this is only partly true. There were, and are, several groups who identify themselves as Rajputs in many areas of northern and central India. And of course, there are several peoples other than Rajputs who live in Rajasthan. However, the Rajputs are often recognized as contributing to the distinctive culture of Rajasthan. These cultural traditions were closely linked with the ideals and aspirations of rulers. From about the 8th century, most of the present-day state of Rajasthan was ruled by various Rajput families. Prithviraj was one such ruler. These rulers cherished the ideal of the hero who fought valiantly, often choosing death on the battlefield rather than face defeat. Stories about Rajput heroes were recorded in poems and songs, which were recited by specially trained minstrels. These preserved the memories of heroes and were expected to inspire others to follow their example. Ordinary people were also attracted by these stories, which often depicted dramatic situations, and a range of strong emotions: loyalty, friendship, love, valor, anger, etc. Did women find a place within these stories? Sometimes, they figure as the cause for conflicts, as men fought with one another to either win or protect women. Women are also depicted as following their heroic husbands in both life and death. There are stories about the practice of sati or the immolation of widows on the funeral pyre of their husbands. So those who followed the heroic ideal often had to pay for it with their lives. Beyond regional frontiers, the story of Kathak. If heroic traditions can be found in different regions in different forms, the same is true of dance. Let us look at the history of one dance form, Kathak, now associated with several parts of North India. The term Kathak is derived from Katha, a word used in Sanskrit and other languages for story. The Kathaks were originally a caste of storytellers in temples of North India, who embellished their performances with gestures and songs. Kathak began evolving into a distinct mode of dance in the 15th and 16th centuries with the spread of the Bhakti movement. The legends of Radha Krishna were enacted in folk plays called Rasalila, which combined folk dance with the basic gestures of the Kathak storytellers. Under the Mughal emperors and their nobles, Kathak was performed in the court, where it acquired its present features and developed into a form of dance with a distinctive style. Subsequently, it developed in two traditions or gharanas, one in the courts of Rajasthan, Jaipur, and the other in Lucknow. Under the patronage of Wajid Ali Shah, the last Nawab of Awadh, it grew into a major art form. By the third quarter of the 19th century it was firmly entrenched as a dance form not only in these two regions, but in the adjoining areas of present-day Punjab, Haryana, Jammu and Kashmir, Bihar and Madhya Pradesh. Emphasis was laid on intricate and rapid footwork, elaborate costumes, as well as on the enactment of stories. Kathak, like several other cultural practices, was viewed with disfavor by most British administrators in the 19th and 20th centuries. However, it survived and continued to be performed by courtesans, and was recognized as one of 6 classical forms of dance in the country after independence. Painting for patrons, the tradition of miniatures. Another tradition that developed in different ways was that of miniature painting. Miniatures, as their very name suggests, are small-sized paintings, generally done in watercolor on cloth or paper. The earliest miniatures were on palm leaves or wood. Some of the most beautiful of these, found in western India, were used to illustrate Jaina texts. The Mughal emperors Akbar, Jahangir, and Shah Jahan patronized highly skilled painters who primarily illustrated manuscripts containing historical accounts and poetry. These were generally painted in brilliant colors and portrayed court scenes, scenes of battle or hunting, and other aspects of social life. They were often exchanged as gifts and were viewed only by an exclusive few, the emperor and his close associates. With the decline of the Mughal Empire, many painters moved out to the courts of the emerging regional states. As a result, Mughal artistic tastes influenced the regional courts of the Deccan and the Rajput courts of Rajasthan. At the same time, they retained and developed their distinctive characteristics. Portraits of rulers and court scenes came to be painted, following the Mughal example. Besides, themes from mythology and poetry were depicted at centers such as Mewar, Jodhpur, Bundi, Kota, and Kishangarh. Another region that attracted miniature paintings was the Himalayan foothills around the modern-day state of Himachal Pradesh. By the late 17th century this region had developed a bold and intense style of miniature painting called Basali. The most popular text to be painted here was Banadatta's Rasamanjari. Nader Shah's invasion and the conquest of Delhi in 1739 resulted in the migration of Mughal artists to the hills to escape the uncertainties of the plains. Here they found ready patrons, which led to the founding of the Kangra school of painting. By the mid-18th century the Kangra artists developed a style which breathed a new spirit into miniature painting. The source of inspiration was the Vaishnavite traditions. Soft colors including cool blues and greens, and a lyrical treatment of themes distinguished Kangra painting. Remember that ordinary women and men painted as well on pots, walls, floors, cloth works of art that have occasionally survived, unlike the miniatures that were carefully preserved in palaces for centuries. A closer look, Bengal. The growth of a regional language. As we saw at the outset, we often tend to identify regions in terms of the language spoken by the people. So, we assume that people in Bengal always spoke Bengali. However, what is interesting is that while Bengali is now recognized as a language derived from Sanskrit, early Sanskrit texts, mid-1st millennium BCE, suggest that the people of Bengal did not speak Sanskritic languages. How, then, did the new language emerge? From the 4th-3rd centuries BCE, commercial ties began to develop between Bengal and Magadha, South Bihar, which may have led to the growing influence of Sanskrit. During the 4th century, the Gupta rulers established political control over North Bengal and began to settle Brahmanas in this area.